Hello there, I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru, and this case here is the Phanteks Enthoo Evolv ATX, which is being launched just before the start of Computex 2015. The very name Phanteks Enthoo Evolv ATX pretty much tells you everything you need to know about this case, provided you've read Kit Guru and have kept pace with the various Phanteks cases. The significant point is with Evolv, aluminium. Obviously ATX speaks for itself, although funnily enough the ATX name is not entirely accurate because Phanteks tells us this case will actually take some eATX motherboards, albeit the very small eATX motherboards, 10 point something inches wide. So although the spec claims eATX to a certain extent, my advice to you is ignore that. ATX it is. Right, so what we have here is a gunmetal grey aluminium clad case. Underneath it's all steel. I'll give you a quick tour of the various bits and pieces. So smooth front panel, windowed side panel, aluminium there, and steel at the back, aluminium at the top. We've got slots for the air to flow out of the case, and we've got slots at the front for air to flow in. Let me just pull off this windowed side panel. It's one of these, you swing it open and just lift it off. Huge great window, nicely done, screwed in place, 3mm aluminium plate, no noise deadening whatsoever. In a sense the aluminium, that's almost a given, so they've just gone the other way, which is the entire blessed thing is a window. Let me put that down there, and then we turn to the other side, swing this panel open, and similarly lift it off the two hinge pins. So this is aluminium plate with some fasteners on it to allow you to mount it to the case. That's the thing with aluminium. You can either work it, you can weld it, bend it, whatever, or use it flat. We've seen recently with Antec, they had a very swoopy curved front panel that was actually very nicely done. Probably cost them a fortune to make. Alternatively, we've got various Lian Li cases, welded or riveted together. Lots of nice aluminium sheetwork. In this instance, essentially, Phanteks has taken plate and stamped it a bit, bent it. They've not worked it especially hard, and that is the best way to keep it in decent condition without risking getting creases and bends all over the place. So it's quite an angular sort of styling. So the two side panels are flat, the top has got these angles, and then here we go like that. It does, as I say, mean no optical drive bay. We do, however, have there a flip up I/O cover, which is quite neatly done. Let me just pull off this front panel, which is also on these pop pins. So again, plate. That little duct there, conduit, is for this LED, and then it comes out in this slit here. We've seen that before with Phanteks. It's a nice little feature. And in the accessory box, got a whole load of bit. There we go. In this pack of stuff here, I've got a replacement blue, green or red LED. So you actually physically change out the LED to change the color. You can't switch it somewhere. Then behind that front panel, we've got this full height air filter, which covers. Now this takes quite a pull. Yes, there we go. I'm not quite sure why it does. It's plastic pop pins again, but I've done this a few times now, and each time it takes quite a severe pull to get it off. And that reveals the two 140mm intake fans. You can, if you choose, swap out the 140s for 120s and go for three 120s. You can't add a third 140, your cables are in the way. When it comes to radiators, on the other hand, you can go crazy at the front, anything up to a 360mm radiator, obviously losing the fans in the process. It's a similar thing in the top of the case. Now, again, we've got this sliding rack that we've seen with previous... I haven't got the screwdriver here, that's foolish. Right, it's these shiny screws there, 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3. So release those screws, and then this sheet steel rack slides out, and you can mount the radiator without having to go in and across the case, or up the case if it's standing upright, which means you can actually install a radiator with the motherboard in the case. We've seen that, I think, once before with Phanteks. It's a relatively recent feature of theirs. It works well. It makes more sense on a small case. In this instance, I actually had, I could have pretty much installed without too much trouble. However, it was welcome having it because it just makes life that much easier. It also means that Phanteks is able to leave the roof of the case fixed in place. You don't need access in there to secure your cooling system. Other features. Drive bays. Drive bays can be the bugbear of the enthusiast. Some people want loads of them, some people want none and just want space for cooling. Phanteks has actually offered a surprising number of drive bays in this case. We've got one mount for a drop and lock bay here, as you can see. We've got two mounts for drop and lock bays on the back. Now I've taken that caddy off and moves it to the front for that SSD there. So by default they arrive in these positions, or you can move one around the front. Then you've got down here two drive bays, regular caddies, 3.5, 2.5 jobs, tool free in the usual style. So tool free for 3.5s. If you want to put 2.5 in, you lose the little side mounts and screw them in place. That's all fine. Those caddies slide into these rails here, which obviously I've removed. 8 screws to get those out, 4 from the bottom, 4 from in here. And to gain access to that, I took out this plate here. Now, why would I remove 2 drive bays here, which are minding their own business, doing no harm, and not really blocking an awful lot of airflow? And the answer is to show you one of the little wrinkles that Phanteks has with this case. Clever little feature. Once I clear out that cavity there, I can take this Thermaltake combined reservoir and water pump, and I can put it in like so. If you want to build your own custom cooling loop, I'm obviously just using the Thermaltake hardware there as an example. If you want to build your own loop, Phanteks supplies that water pump mount, which we've seen a good few times from them, and in there are some slots so you can plonk the mount in place, mount your pump to that. There's gazillions of holes which should match up with pretty much any pump that you come up with. Then you need to find somewhere to attach your reservoir. They seem to suggest that this location here would work well, but you're going to find other options. Or of course, if you have a combined unit, it just stands there. Mount your radiator either at the top or the front, or if you choose top and front, and they're saying up to 360mm. Now, it so happens this cooler here is a Corsair H110i GT, which is that's a 280mm 2x140, and it goes in without any trouble whatsoever. There's a decent amount of space there. Little bit of space at the back, slotted mounts. The mounts are actually offset away from this edge of the board, so it's towards the windowed side panel, which means it clears the motherboard quite nicely. Everything basically that you could want from a cooling setup, you've got it right there. Other drive mounts, yes. This is a bit curious. So we've got 3 dedicated 2.5 mounts, and you get 2 caddies, so you can mount 2 drives in the locations you choose. You've got 2 3.5 2.5s that go there, but you might want to lose those for your water cooling. Then you have these sorts of plates here. There are 5 of them, and they've got various sort of slots and such like either side. A little bit like old Dexian shelving, if you remember that. What you get in the pack of accessories are 3 of these drive caddies here. And you take out the little Phanteks plate in whichever location you're going to use. You hook your caddy in place, secure it with a couple of screws, and you can either then mount a 3.5 using these grommets at the side, or 2.5 using the holes in the base. So you've got 5 locations, which essentially are in line with that, or that. Clearly, if you've got a large cooler stood there, you're going to be mounting, if you use this setup, your drive up high. The bottom positions would be irrelevant. On the other hand, if you're filling the top of the case with coolant some way, cooling, you might find it handy to use the lower positions. Now, personally, I have no interest in these whatsoever. I'm never going to use those. But I like the fact that they've put them in, because the only concession that Phanteks has had to make to that setup is that you have this section of the motherboard tray over here, which has got various holes and such like in it. If you didn't get those caddies in the package, that motherboard tray with its bizarre perforations would just be irrelevant. It wouldn't matter to you one way or the other. You might look at it and think, oh, it'd be nice if there were a few sort of cutouts there for cable management or some such, but you just ignore it. And in actual fact, it's quite handy because it allows you to hide cabling galore behind it should you choose, because that window in the side panel is huge. So the fact that this side is completely covered is a good thing. The only way I can see that Phanteks may improve on the setup they've got is if they use the fractal design thermal take thing we've seen recently, where they come up with one or two sort of hooks here where you could mount one of these caddies directly on there. I am certainly not going to say they should do that. It's just a thought. We have therefore, what was that, 7 drive bays we've got now. We've got 2 in the front. We can use up to 3 here, and then we've got 2 2.5s in a choice of locations. And that's the thing, you've got many drive bays and many locations that you can use. Pretty much you can put any drive anywhere, which is impressive going. In terms of building the system, you've got huge access to the back of the motherboard tray. Your power supply cover is fixed, which means that the power supply has to go in here and then secure to the back. Once you've done that, the cabling it's basically hidden. On the back of the motherboard tray, we have this PWM hub. The 3 fans, 2 at the front, 1 at the rear, come attached to the PWM hub, and you can then connect up to 3 more fans because there are 6 connectors in total. And then you put the single header to the motherboard. As it happens, just for fun, I connected the 2 fans from the Corsair H10 IGT to the PWM hub rather than connecting them to the usual wire piece and then connecting them to the motherboard header near the processor socket. Worked absolutely fine. I still had to connect the water pump, of course, to power the thing, but that was no hardship. While I'm rattling around the hardware, so we've got the Corsair cooler, we've got our Sapphire R9290 Trix graphics card, we've got ASRock Z97 killer motherboard. Down the bottom we've got Seasonic Platinum 2 520 watt fanless power supply, and then we've got SanDisk Extreme Pro SSD there, and some Corsair LP memory. Building the system, very easy indeed. I used almost no cable ties, I think 2 or 3. I used the Phanteks hook and loop straps to secure the cabling. Now, part of the reason I used so few cable ties was they actually don't provide very much in the way of tie down points. I would like to see more. On the other hand, you can chuck your cabling in the back. There's a lot of space, something like 35 mil they claim. That's going to be in this deep section here. You've got a fair amount here as well, and you can then lose basically cabling down the bottom and it's just hidden from view. So cable management isn't brilliant, but on the other hand it almost doesn't matter. Also, what I will say in Phanteks' favour is at the top of the board we've got a good number of cable management holes which are invisible from this side because the radiator's in place, which means that, for example, hooking up the 8-pin EPS connector, shove it through, plug it in, job done, easy peasy. Similarly, down the bottom there are some now, the thing is, this case for an ATX is relatively compact. There is almost no space between the motherboard and the power supply cover, which often means that you have to trail your audio, USB and front panel connectors sort of along the motherboard, along the power supply cover, and they kind of just hang in sight. Phanteks has actually got some holes at the back, so instead of having to trail them along and plug them in, you can go through, plug, neat and tidy. So all of that I like. The aspect of this case I don't like is the price. It's £140. I understand why it's £140, because they've taken a steel chassis, put in a whole bunch of features which are perfectly decent and nice. I would guess would add up to, say, a £90 case, maybe £80. At the moment you can buy the Enthoo Pro for £80. This, in many respects, is when you look at this chassis here, is an evolution of the Pro. Steel chassis, lots of features aimed at the water cooling brigade. It's an enthusiast case without being utterly bonkers. And then on top of that, they've added some rather nice aluminium work, and that's whacked the price up to £140. I understand why this is the case. Aluminium is a pain to work with, and you either want that cosmetic look or you don't. Here's the thing. I think the case looks very smart, and I love the gunmetal grey finish. We have seen one of the Phanteks cases comes in what they call titanium green, which is just to die for. Absolutely gorgeous finish. I personally am not that troubled about the idea of aluminium panels. I suppose if I had to toss a coin, I'd favour a quieter case over an aluminium case. And I know you can have both. This case is quiet in the sense that the air flows through these slots, for instance. You don't get the roaring sort of torrent of air coming through. But aluminium means you're not going to get sound deadening material. You're relying on a bit of clever design and some clever baffling and the air going around corners and such like. And Phanteks has done that very well. On the other hand, we've seen cases recently that are simpler in approach. They don't use aluminium, they're steel instead, or possibly plastic. They have sound deadening material, and they're just as quiet can be. It's a question of whether you think those aluminium panels, and I'm going to reach for the front panel. The question is, do you think that that is just absolutely to die for, or do you think it's a piece of aluminium that's almost flat but not quite? And I sort of incline towards that latter point of view. It's a nice piece of work, it's a quality piece of metal work, and I like it, but I'm just not particularly fussed about having it on my PC case. However, once you take off the aluminium panelling, the stripped down chassis is very good indeed. My faults that I can point out are almost non-existent. Essentially, some cable tie down points would pretty much do it. Also, the cable management feeding out to this drop and lock bay on the front isn't too great. You kind of have to poke cables out through the grommet and kind of wrench them around a bit to attach them. That's obviously intended as a showcase, and yet it's not completely spot on. It's a tiny, tiny detail. I suppose you could argue it'd be nice if you had 4 LEDs here and some sort of switch. We've seen Phanteks lighting systems that are really clever. So instead of making me change my LED for a different colour one, perhaps give me the option of changing the colour. But it's a trivial point. The way they've got all those different drive bays and given me many options for installing basically either very few bays, I can have an SSD, or I can go up to 7 drives. That's very clever. And to do all that in a case that is actually pretty small, yes, I'm impressed. The engineering work, the design, the features, the water cooling side of things with this chassis, very well done indeed. The only question is, are you particularly troubled or interested or excited about having aluminium panels? If you are, you'll pay the premium. If you're not, well, let's face it, Phanteks has a great many very good cases in their range which will take your cash instead. So to use the hackneyed expression, it really is a case of you pays your money, it takes your choice. In this case, I admire the Evolv ATX a great deal, but the aluminium, it just doesn't quite win me over. Having said that, it's a very good case indeed. So this is Leo Woodcock for Kit Guru.